At 41, Sergio Oliva Jr. sat down in front of a camera and spoke about his time with Dorian Yates in terms that were more direct and more measured than most people expected. There was no grievance, no carefully managed statement designed to protect anyone's reputation. What he offered was something closer to an honest account, one that doesn't support the narrative the bodybuilding community had constructed around their split. The assumption was conflict. The reality is more straightforward. But understanding it requires going back to where the relationship began. A chance meeting in Spain, a difficult period in Dubai that preceded it, and a six-time Olympia champion whose influence extended well beyond training methodology. Before addressing the split, it's worth establishing why the partnership drew so much attention when it was first announced. This was not a standard coaching arrangement between a veteran and a developing competitor. It was a collaboration between two of the most consequential bloodlines in the history of the sport. Dorian Yates, born in Birmingham, England, holds a record that remains unmatched in professional bodybuilding. He won 6 consecutive Mr. Olympia titles from 1992 to 1997 without a single defeat across that entire run. Over the course of his professional career, he recorded 15 major contest wins and 2 second-place finishes. He did not lose the Olympia title. He retired from competition while still the reigning champion. The decision was driven by injury, a torn bicep followed by a career-ending torn tricep. At the 1997 Olympia, competing with that torn tricep, he placed first. He walked away on his own terms, his record intact, but he was known throughout his career as the Shadow, a name given to him by Peter McGough, one of the sport's most respected journalists. The nickname reflected a genuine behavioral pattern. Yates rarely confirmed whether he intended to compete at a given show. He would arrive, win, and leave with minimal public presence in between. While other competitors cultivated profiles and sought visibility, Yates trained at Temple Gym, his basement facility in Birmingham, under a philosophy he called blood and guts. The core principle was intensity over volume. A single all-out working set per exercise, taken past failure, extended with forced reps, drop sets, and partial reps. Those who have trained this way consistently describe it as among the most physically demanding approaches in the sport. After retiring, Yates did not remain in competitive bodybuilding's orbit. He turned toward yoga, meditation, philosophy, and ayahuasca ceremonies, a sustained shift in focus that lasted years. He settled in Marbella, Spain with his wife, trained 3 days a week, continued operating his supplement company DY Nutrition, and accepted a small number of athletes through his DY Academy. It was in that context, a retired 6-time champion living in southern Spain with a fundamentally different relationship to competition and the sport itself, that Sergio Oliva Jr. encountered him. Sergio Oliva Jr. carries one of the most celebrated names in bodybuilding history. His father, Sergio Oliva Sr., was a Cuban defector who came to the United States in 1962 and went on to win the Mr. Olympia 3 consecutive times, 67, 68, and 69. He defeated Arnold Schwarzenegger at the peak of Arnold's competitive career. He was known as the Myth, a nickname that came from the reaction of people who saw him in person and struggled to reconcile what they were looking at with what seemed physically possible. The muscle bellies were long, the waist was narrow, the proportions were extreme. The name wasn't hyperbole. It was the only description that fit. What gives the Dorian connection particular weight is this. When Dorian Yates was asked who the most genetically gifted bodybuilder in history was, he did not say Ronnie Coleman, Lee Haney, or Arnold Schwarzenegger. He said Sergio Oliva Sr. He described Oliva Sr. as having uniformly long muscle bellies across his entire body, and called him probably the most genetically gifted bodybuilder who ever lived. He then noted what Oliva looked like in the late 1960s, given what was available to athletes at that time before the full pharmaceutical era, before modern training science. The implication was straightforward. No one else had done what Oliva did, under those conditions, at that level. When Dorian Yates and Sergio Oliva Jr. began training together, that history was present in the room. The man who had named Sergio's father the greatest genetic specimen in the sport's history was now training the son of that man. 2 distinct eras of bodybuilding, converging in the same gym in the same city, working toward the same goal. When Dorian posted on Instagram, "Guess who is coming to be my neighbor? Forces combining," and Sergio responded, "I have the blood, now I guess it's time for the guts." The exchange was noted widely across the community. It laid out the situation plainly. Sergio carried the inherited genetics. Dorian brought the methodology he had built over decades. The training partnership was an attempt to find out what those two things produced together. Before any of that could take shape, however, Sergio had to get through a period in Dubai that would prove to be among the most difficult of his life. Much of the attention around the Dorian partnership has focused on the training itself. Less discussed is the sequence of events that preceded it. Sergio had been based in Dubai for much of 2021 and 2022, training there and working toward a comeback. The environment offered distance from the expectations that came with his name in the United States, and at first that suited him. In early 2023, circumstances changed sharply. He was driving through one of the city's busiest streets, moving slowly, well under the speed limit, when a courier on a bicycle came through the traffic and struck the side of his vehicle. The man fell into the road. A truck hit him. Sergio witnessed it directly and immediately left his car, moving into the same heavy traffic to reach the man and help. 3 witnesses confirmed his actions at the scene. Emergency services arrived and indicated the man had sustained a broken leg and would be transported to hospital. At that point, it appeared the situation, while serious, would be resolved. That night, or the following morning, the man died, possibly from internal bleeding, though Sergio had no way to confirm the cause. Under Dubai law, when someone dies in a traffic incident, everyone involved is detained regardless of fault while the case is investigated. No bail, no waiting at home. Those involved go to the police station and remain there until a judge reviews the matter. Sergio was held for several days. He described the conditions as the worst experience of his life, said he was not permitted to speak about what it was like inside, but acknowledged that before the physical conditions had taken their toll, his mental state had already deteriorated severely. He became ill during his detention and was released sick, mentally exhausted, and physically depleted. When the judge reviewed the case, the finding was unambiguous. Sergio was not at fault, no criminal charges were filed. The police had been thorough in their investigation, Sergio's own description, and concluded that what occurred was a traffic violation, nothing more. 3 witnesses had corroborated that conclusion. He left detention in poor health, and with a decision already formed, he could not remain in Dubai. He could not prepare for a competition there. The city no longer felt like a place he could mentally recover in. He needed to leave entirely. He wanted to improve his Spanish and prepare for a competition in a different country. He reached out to a mutual friend, someone who had been living in Venice and had also spent time in Dubai, and mentioned he was looking for a place to train in Spain. That friend pointed him to a gym where Dorian Yates trained and noted that Yates was there regularly. There was no larger plan behind what followed. No formal arrangement, no organized introduction. An athlete who had just come through one of the most difficult periods of his life spoke to a mutual friend who mentioned a name that opened an unexpected door. Sergio later described what happened next in straightforward terms. He said the whole thing came together by accident and that it became the most exciting development of his career. He had not orchestrated it. He arrived in Spain, found the gym, and he and Dorian Yates began spending time together, talking about training, about the sport, about what preparation for the 2024 Arnold Classic might involve. At some point during those conversations, Yates agreed to coach him. When the news became public, the reaction within bodybuilding was significant. The combination carried obvious weight, a 6-time Olympia champion working with the son of the man that same champion had called the most genetically gifted bodybuilder who ever lived. The prospect of Yates' training methodology being applied to Sergio Jr.'s inherited physical attributes drew immediate attention. Former champion Samir Bannout publicly stated his belief that Sergio had everything required to win the Mr. Olympia, given the right approach. The partnership generated a level of interest the sport hadn't seen around Sergio's career in some time. Then Dorian Yates posted on Instagram. The message read, "Guess who is coming to be my neighbor? Forces combining." It was deliberately vague, consistent with how Yates had operated throughout his career. He had been known as the Shadow for decades and rarely confirmed anything publicly before he was prepared to. But the post read as an announcement. Sergio's response, "I have the blood, now I guess it's time for the guts," referenced Yates' training philosophy, acknowledged his own lineage, and signaled his intentions. The bodybuilding community responded immediately. The widely held view was that this partnership might finally draw out what many had long believed Sergio Oliva Jr. was capable of. The first documented training session was a back workout, which Dorian posted footage of on his own Facebook page. 3 exercises: lat pull-down machine, seated cable row machine, and barbell Romanian deadlifts. For anyone accustomed to the modern bodybuilding approach, high volume, multiple exercises, dozens of sets, 2-hour sessions, the session looked almost minimalistic. It wasn't. The distinction between blood and guts and conventional training isn't the number of movements. It's what happens inside each working set. Dorian's system requires pushing past the point where most people stop. Past failure means past the moment the muscles can no longer complete a rep unassisted. Forced reps follow. A training partner or coach provides just enough assistance to keep the weight moving, allowing additional stress on the muscle. Drop sets come after that, reducing the weight so the athlete can continue past what the body is already signaling is its limit. The entire session lasted less than an hour. Sergio walked out in a different condition than he walked in. He posted about it himself, with the caption, "Got the blood working on the guts." The footage made clear he wasn't being theatrical. He was registering a genuine difference between how he had trained before, and the approach Dorian had always maintained was the only one that produced real results. What Sergio said about the training environment beyond the weights is also notable. He specifically described Dorian, even in his 60s, as still having what he called the dog in him, a competitive intensity that hadn't diminished. Dorian himself noted that he still had to deliberately moderate his effort during training to avoid pushing to the point of injury. Decades removed from competition, he was still holding himself back. That was the environment Sergio was operating in daily, and it was having a measurable effect on him. Sergio also spoke about the process of adaptation. Dorian's system was developed around Dorian's physique, a thicker, shorter frame that responded in a particular way to maximum intensity training. Sergio's structure is different, taller, with a distinct build. The competitive landscape has also shifted since Dorian's era. In the 1990s, glute development was not a specific training priority, and judging criteria at the time didn't require it. Today, competing at the Olympia level demands a level of conditioning that includes full glute development. What Sergio was doing during this period was substantive, absorbing Dorian's foundational philosophy, the intensity principle, training to failure, the mental framework, while adapting those concepts to the requirements of 2024 competition. That requires understanding why a method works, not simply replicating what it looks like. The context behind Sergio's decision to travel to Spain is often overlooked in coverage focused on training footage and competition speculation, but it's central to understanding the story. Sergio didn't go to Spain for a better back workout. He went because of something Chris Cormier had said. Cormier was one of the more gifted bodybuilders of his generation, an athlete who competed at the Olympia level for years, with the genetics, drive, and work ethic that should have translated into titles. Late in his career, he trained with Dorian Yates. What Cormier said afterward was something Sergio had clearly been considering for some time. Cormier said Dorian was the first person who had ever taught him how to train properly, that the experience fundamentally changed his understanding of what it meant to have strong genetics and actually develop them. What stayed with Cormier wasn't the information itself, it was how long it had taken him to find it. He said that reaching Dorian earlier could have altered the trajectory of his career. Sergio took that account and acted on it. He was not going to be in the same position at 45, looking back at a decade he could have used differently. He traveled to Spain specifically to narrow the gap between his genetic potential and his competitive results, with a clear understanding that doing so required direct access to someone who had already produced that outcome in other athletes. When he arrived in Marbella, what Yates offered went beyond training methodology. Yates said as much himself, in some of the most direct public remarks he had made in years, that what he was most grateful for were the things that had nothing to do with bodybuilding. The man who in his competitive prime was described as ferociously focused and borderline unapproachable had changed considerably. Where he once spent his days obsessing over muscle contractions and caloric surplus, he now practiced yoga daily, meditated, and had participated in multiple ayahuasca ceremonies. He spoke about life with a philosophical calm that Oliva Jr. clearly had not anticipated finding at a gym in southern Spain. That was something Oliva Jr. needed. After Dubai, after witnessing someone die in front of him, after days in a cell, after returning sick and mentally depleted, what he required was not simply a new training approach. He needed a framework for managing the kind of disruption that had become a recurring feature of his life. In Yates, he found someone who had endured extreme pressure, extreme physical and mental suffering, and had come through it clear-headed and stable. Oliva Jr. was absorbing what he could from that example. He said directly that Yates's philosophical approach to life and to handling problems was something he recognized as a gap in himself, and that he was actively working to close it. For a competitive bodybuilder, that is an unusual thing to say on camera. The standard conversation in that world concerns training splits and conditioning packages. Oliva Jr. was instead describing how a 6-time Olympia champion had helped him develop steadiness under pressure. The collaboration appeared to be building towards something substantial. The training was being documented, the physique updates were drawing attention, and the partnership had generated significant interest across the bodybuilding community. It ended for none of the reasons the speculation suggested. It ended over paperwork. During the Spain prep, Oliva Jr. sustained an injury. The details were not fully disclosed, but the consequence was that he was unable to train with Yates as planned through the final portion of the training cycle. That setback was then compounded by a visa issue. European authorities denied his application. He had already remained in Spain beyond his permitted stay, and when he consulted a lawyer, he was told that continuing further risked a ban from entering Europe for up to 4 years. A partnership that was intended to culminate in a 2024 Arnold Classic appearance ended with him packing his belongings and returning to the United States. With Yates and the work they had been doing together on the other side of an ocean he could not legally re-enter for the foreseeable future. His account of the situation was both appreciative and openly disappointed. He said it was difficult that he had wanted to finish the prep with Yates, that after consulting a lawyer, he understood he had already overstayed his welcome legally, and that he could not risk the possibility of a 4-year entry ban. He described the injury as an additional frustration, said it was hard not being able to train with Yates through to the end, and then said he was genuinely grateful for everything he had learned, in the gym and outside of it. That is not the language of someone carrying resentment. It is the language of someone who found real value in an experience and is dealing with the fact that circumstances cut it short before its natural conclusion. There was no falling out. Oliva Jr. made that clear after returning to the United States, stating that he planned to obtain a visa for the following year and return to finish what they had started. That is not how someone describes a partnership that broke down. Juan Oliva Jr. settled in Las Vegas. One of his first moves was to sit for an extended interview covering the full period. Dubai, Spain, the training with Yates, the visa situation, the injury, and the depression he had been managing throughout. What emerged was a picture of someone who had absorbed years of compounding setbacks and had arrived at what appeared to be a clearer sense of direction than at any previous point in his career. At 308 pounds, carrying what he and others described as possibly the best off-season conditioning of his life, he stated that this is the easiest era in history to win the Mr. Olympia, and that if he fails to take advantage of it, that responsibility falls on him. He used the word failure, not as a critique of anyone else, but as a personal standard he was applying to himself.